Hello. All right, I guess I must have deleted 7.3 or something happened. The actual 7.3 is not on the internet. So here you go, here's the new 7.3 for you. So, review quickly, 7.2, you learned theta is equal to tangent, -1, b over a. You learned r equals the square root of a squared plus b squared. So we learned that. We also, so if we recall from the last lesson, from chapter 6, we learned that x is equal to cosine theta, y was equal to r sine theta, sine theta. Now, with that being said, what we are doing, remember, all we've done so far in this chapter is replace the x's and the y's. The x is replaced by a, the y is replaced by b. So, now the only difference is that in the y one, it's going to be b equals r sine theta with an I there. Does that make sense? And this is going to be a equals r cosine theta. All right, so any questions on that? All right, so far so good, right? Now, when we have r cosine theta plus sine I theta, when we have that, another way to write that, okay, another way to write that is with this, r cis theta, okay? So it's another way to write it. When you have this all together, r times those two, another way to write it is CIS, all right? Now, so this is where we go from polar form back to regular form and vice versa. So any questions, got your theorems, got your things, and they're all written on the board in 7.4 as well. First off, that's the information you need to write down. Now, so the first problem we're going to do is 2 plus 2 square root of 3. All right, 2 plus the square root of 3. We want to put that into polar form. Well, what's polar form? Polar form is when it's going to say r cis theta. Okay, so we need an r and we need a theta. Okay, so we need an r and a theta. That's what we're looking for. Okay, so how do we solve that? Remember, theta equals tangent -1 b over a, and r equals a squared plus b squared. So, what is this? A, what's this? B, good. Awesome, all right? So, here we go, ready? So first step, we're gonna look for our r. 2 squared plus 2 square root of 3, and all of this is gonna be squared. So that's what we are left with. What's it gonna give us? 4 plus, when you square this, it's 4, and you square that, it's 3. So r equals the square root of 16, which in turn is r equals 4. So we have our r. Everybody got, so far we good? Everybody's good? So far r is 4. We all understand where we got that from. Now, how do we find theta? Well, here's our theta. Okay, so our equation, theta equals tangent -1 b over a. So, class, what's b? B is 2 square root of 3 over 2. So, any questions on that so far? Good. Right, so tangent -1 is really going to be square root of 3. So now think about your unit circle. When you look at that unit circle, where on that unit circle is it 1 and the square root of 3? Well, the answer to that is at 3 pi over 3. Okay, at pi over 3. So Your theta is pi over 3. Any questions? Everybody good? All right, wonderful. So, once you have those two, you have your r, you have your theta. What are the two ways you could write that in polar form? The first one, very simple. Take these, plug them in. 4 CIS pi over 3. There's your answer. Another way to write it in polar form is 4 cosine pi over 3 plus sine I sine pi over 3. And there's your answer. Okay? So you have two options. The final answer is this one. You can skip it if you know you have those two. All right? Any questions? All right, so that's how you go from a rectangular form to a polar form. All right? I'm going to erase. I'll leave up. All right, next. Our next question is, if I want to change 1/2 cosine pi over 6 plus I sine pi over 6. Okay, so first off, if I want to change this back to rectangular form, so I'm going the opposite direction. So, how would I go about this? Now, remember, A equals R cosine theta. B equals R sine theta with an I in there, right? So that's what you can do, okay? So plug it in. So here we go. All right, plug it in. So we're left with 1/2 cosine pi over 6 equals A. Well, what's that going to give me? So what is cosine pi over 6? What we do know is that on the unit circle, cosine pi over 6 is the square root of 3 over 2 times 1/2. A equals square root of 3 over 4. So far, everybody good? Okay, so we're going to work it out to there. Now, what do we need? We need B. Well, what's B? 1/2 I sine pi over 6. So class, what is sine pi over 6? Sine pi over 6 is what value on your unit circle? The answer is 1/2. So 1/2 times 1/2 is 1/4 I. So your answer, so that's what B is, that's what A is. If I want to write this in complex number, square root of 3 over 4 plus 1/4 I. And you're done. So pretty simple, but you're just using these four formulas to be able to solve it and manipulate the equation. All right, good. So let's go ahead and erase. All right, next one. The next problem is 3 CIS 3 pi over 4. Okay, so what do? We're looking to get this in rectangular form. So we're looking at the same kind of problem, we just have to work it out. So here we go. First step, 3 cosine 3 pi over 4 plus I sine 3 pi over 4. Now what? We distribute, right? So it's going to be 3 cosine 3/4 pi plus I 3I sine 3/4 pi. So what is cosine 3/4 pi? Our answer is negative square root of 2. So 3 negative square root of 2 over 2 plus 3I, and this is going to be square root of 2 over 2. When we finish with this work, what are we left with? Negative 3 square root of 2 over 2 plus 3i square root of 2 over 2. And that's your final answer. So you're going either direction on these. You're doing either direction, and all you're doing is solving them out. All right? If they give you a drawing with a point, so let's say they give you one here to practice. 1 and 4i. Well, we know it's negative 4 to the 4th I, right? The 4i because it's down there in the basement. So if you have to find those, what do? Well, there's our A and there's our B. So we set it up and we plug them right into these two equations, and we can solve for the theta and the r. And that's what you're looking to do. Your theta and your r. If they give you they don't come out to specific, and in this case it won't because it's dealing with 4. If it doesn't come out, then you're just going to get a decimal. All right, you'll get a decimal or a radians, in this case a radians. All right, but that's how you would solve that. You would put it in the polar form going back the other way. Now, last one. The last thing you have to remember, when you're dealing with quotient and product of these two formulas. So when they give you two formulas and then you have to multiply them or divide them, the one thing you have to remember is that you are either subtracting or adding. Just remember that. When would you add? With the product. Good. When would you subtract? With the division, quotient. Good. So let's go ahead and let's do one of those. And if we need to go over a polar form one from point, we can. I don't think we'll need to. So they're going to give you two equations. 5 cosine pi over 4 plus I sine pi over 4. And then they're going to give you a second quotient. Second one is 3 cosine pi over 6 plus I sine pi over 6. Now, if I were to say to you, I want the quotient of these two, what would you do? You're going to multiply. So the way to multiply is just multiply. So 3 times 5 is 15. Good. Now, when you multiply the inside, you're multiplying the same thing, but all you have to remember is you're adding your fraction. So cosine pi over 4 plus pi over 6 plus I sine pi over 4 plus pi over 6. Okay? So what do we do to finish this out? To kind of tie it all together. Well, we're adding them, right? So what's it going to give me? Common denominator is 12. Good. So times 3 times 3 times 2 times 2 times 3 times 3 times 2 times 2. Okay, that's going to give me cosine 5 over 12 plus I sine 5 over pi. Okay, all times 15. Another quick way to write that is 1 CIS 5 pi over 12. All right, so if you, instead of leaving it big, if you consolidate this to cosine CIS pi over 4, and this one CIS pi over 6, you can combine those easier and more efficiently. Now, let's say we're doing the quotient. So what's the quotient? So what are you going to do with the quotient? You're going to do division, which means you're going to subtract. Good. So, but this is much easier if you do it cosecant 4 divided by 3 CIS pi over 6. So what are we going to do? Now we're going to divide, so we're going to be left with 5/3 CIS, and all we're going to do is subtract pi over 4 minus pi over 6. So we're going to treat these two thetas almost like they're exponents, okay? So when we do that, you're left with times 3 times 2 times 3 times 2. So 3 minus 2 is pi over 12. And that's your answer for quotient. All right, so that should be your 7.3 lesson. Hopefully that helps you. Sorry I missed it up. Hopefully you're not too far behind.